I may not do it justice. All right, so welcome to Drupal Nights, everyone. Tonight we have the pleasure of having Kristof Van Tomme doing a talk on Drupal for documentation and developer portals. And I'm going to let Kristof talk a little bit about himself, but thank you all for joining, and we're going to be having it in this venue from now on, right? We don't know yet, but basically this is hosted by BioRAFT, and we're a Drupal enterprise shop, and basically we're going to have this every month, and so you're welcome to join again, and we hope to see you all again.
Thank you. Thank you for the intro. Hi. So I don't know if you want to come closer, or you don't have to, but okay. Michelle, I think it was in New Orleans, I think, at Chelsea. Yeah. I was talking with Michelle in New Orleans about coming to Boston, and she's like, "Oh, you're coming to Boston? We're still looking for a speaker for tonight. Do you want to give a talk?" I was like, "Sure." And it's almost 10 years that we're in Drupal. Back in the days, way past, we were a BioTech consultancy. So this is why BioRAFT resonates so well with us, or with me at least, because I'm a bioengineer. I had done a little website, and that was a lot of fun, like in Drupal. And then I had to go back to Belgium, to home, and there was like this Drupal event, and it was free in Brussels, and it was Drupalcon 2006, and then Dries was selling T-shirts for 20 euro a piece to raise enough money to pay for the venue, and there were like 200 people, but it was really amazing because, I'm not a developer, I'm a clicker. I call myself. Well, sometimes I call myself a click monkey, so I'm a site builder, and sitting around the table, I remember, this is one shot that I remember. I'm really bad at memory, but that one I remember. Sitting around the table at Camp that just came after Drupalcamp, with Gabor, CHX, Dries, people from the local government, and a bunch of other people. I think we were like 15 or something. We need to make Drupal multilingual, because if we make it multilingual, the Belgian government is going to use it. And I was kind of the start that Gabor then picked it up, and then that became this big initiative. And I think I don't know how much, I'm sure it was a big influence, but probably there were other influences. But it was kind of like the start of really good multilingual Drupal, and that's been really huge and important. So I was sitting at that table, not being a developer, just sitting these are so smart people. Wow, this is awesome. And they let me sit at the same table. And it was really good, a good experience. So I went home, and I remember telling to Laura, my wife, from now on, we're going to drop this BioTech sales and marketing stuff, and we're only going to do websites. We are going to become the Drupal company in the pharmaceutical niche. And nothing ever came from that. We never had any pharma companies work with us. I tried a little bit, but it grew and grew and grew, and then and now we're 25. So that's kind of like the story. And then 5 years ago, I got really excited about this thing, Dita. And I'm sure you remember that. I was preaching to everybody about Dita and how awesome it was, and we didn't really do much with it. But so I got sold onto Dita. Dita stands for Darwin Information Type Architecture. And what you see there is a Darwin finch. So, the finches, the Darwin finches with the beaks, and they're all there's different types, and they adapted to their environment. So Dita is an XML language for doing documentation in a single source way, so that you can reuse it and you can adapt it. So it's like adaptable documentation. And I got really excited about that because I really believed in reusable content. And I wanted to use it for like making proposals and things like that. And, you know, I set out because I wanted to make a component content management system. Like, you know, that's how they call the CMSs for DITA in Drupal. So I went to all the conferences and talked about it, but none of these people wanted to invest in like, you know, an open source project. They were like, that sounds awfully awesome. Like, tell us when it's ready. And you know, we looked further. In the meantime, I got to know the Write the Docs community. Or before Write the Docs, we started the Walkup project. So like more and more, I got sucked into this whole documentation thing. Although that, to be very honest, I write very little documentation myself. I've done a few posts, not much. I see myself more as an advocate for documentation tools in the community. And then like we've got a technical writer team that we started up. My wife, Laura, she's now also working in that. And we've been contributing to the documentation for Drupal 8 because we're like, you know, we just had to do that because, you know, else, like, how could we say that we're documentation people if we do? So I think I haven't been able to do it personally, but through the company we've at least contributed. So so one of the big things that we did was 3 years ago. We started with Walkup. And Walkup, I'll go more deeper on it a little bit later. Walkup is you know these text bubbles? Click here, like they start up on an application, and they're like, "Hi, welcome to the tour, and let me show you how you do this." And they take you through the application. So we built an open source tool for that. We did a crowdfunding, so we did a first prototype. We did a crowdfunding on Indiegogo. We were successful. We raised, I think it was $12,000 back then, which was like big money for crowdfunding. And we built this Drupal distribution for walkthroughs, and it was 3 years ago. And so like along the way, like we had that up. We had a few first people that were playing with it, that were working with it. But then we learned, like, well, we've learned a lot in the last 3 years. We're still working on this project. But we've rewritten it in Go, so now it's a microservice, so that it's a much smaller footprint. You don't have to maintain a Drupal site to keep your walkthroughs working, and that's a good thing. Because we had a lot of dependencies in it, and it was just a maintenance nightmare. And this is just one media type in a documentation solution, so it needed to be slimmer. So now it's like a Go application, so it's written in Go. It runs in a container, so it's easier to get started. We have a Docker image and so on and so on. We're now working on screenshotting for it, but more about that in a little bit. So and then we started looking. So now one of the problems we had was documentation is not super sexy for developers. So like they were like, we sometimes had people in our team even say like, you know, why are we doing this documentation stuff? Like, why don't we just make better UX? This is like the typical thing that you hear a lot. It's like, just make better UX. Like if your user experience is good enough, you don't need documentation, which I don't agree with. But there was always kind of like a disconnect. And then, but now recently we partnered with an API management company, Apigee, and they have a developer portal in Drupal, and we're working with them to like really maximize that and like bringing lots of different documentation things into it, and you know, bringing the experience that we've gained over the years about documentation and like single sourcing and all of that stuff, and bring that to developer portals. And that's been a lot of fun because it's closer to our developers who, you know, love APIs, and documenting APIs does make more sense. And yeah, I'll skip this one. This is like, I think one important thing is, I say this every time, and like today in a meeting, they told me like, okay, so can you go up to management and tell them what you just said, that I see documentation as a marketing and sales tool also. What I mean with that is that today, people, when they go looking for, like when they are looking and comparing products, they'll end up looking at documentation. If you have good documentation, there's a bigger chance they'll buy a product. And so having great documentation, the sales cycle starts with your docs. It's possible that you're being evaluated and you don't even know, and that people might check out your product and disappear because the docs were not right. And also SEO, like documentation generally is very heavy on keywords, and all the features that you have are in your docs normally. And that means that if people start looking for certain keywords, they'll probably bump into your docs. And documentation can be a good tool for capturing your potential customers. So I say this every time I talk to documentation people, like, you know, you should be selling your documentation as a really important marketing asset, and not just as a cost center, because in too many businesses, documentation is still seen as a cost center. I'll skip that. That's the, you know, the developer portals. I don't know who here is more interested in the developer portal piece. Is anybody like hardcore, like anybody working on developer portals, like has an API to documents, or no? Yeah, then I won't go too deep in the developer portals, and I'll stick more to the documentation.
I'm kind of curious to hear a little more.
Okay. So developer portals, you're familiar with what's there for, or shall I explain a little bit, or? Okay, so developer portals are websites that basically are documentation hubs for developers that need to learn how to use an API, basically. So now today, like APIs are booming. APIs are going crazy, and they're all over the place. And the thing is that, so in a lot of cases, because APIs are being developed by developers, and because the unit that's responsible for an API is a developer unit most of the time, they're often really, really bad at marketing. And then you sometimes end up with just some documentation on GitHub. We're guilty of a lot of this stuff for our own product, but the whole, like, bringing all the pieces together is kind of important to make it as easy as possible for developers to start working with your API. And now, like, APIs are everywhere. Banks are using them, and like there's a lot of people. So I think that Drupal is a great tool for bringing all these pieces together, because there's so many disparate resources, and like in a lot of cases, developers will just keep them separate, but they're not linked up, and it's kind of hard to get started with them. And that's why, like, that's the function of a developer portal, is to bring all these pieces together. Now there's some out-of-the-box solutions, but they're more documentation oriented. I like the promise and the possibilities of the developer portal that Apigee built, because it binds together a tool for making the onboarding easy. So they have things like mock API. Oh, everybody knows what is an API. Like, if anybody doesn't know, if anybody gets lost and you're hearing stuff that you don't understand, please shout. Okay, don't be afraid. So they have a tool for mock APIs, which so you could make an API that will return something, but it's not connected to, like, you know, the real stuff. So you can make like onboarding experiences that make it easy to, like, start with little step and then escalate to more involvement. And that's yeah, I think that's an interesting perspective. Then you can add your Drupal documentation, and I'll show some more a little bit later of stuff that we've built using Drupal, where you just, like, pull docs from GitLab and then do syntax highlighting and a bunch of other stuff. So that's the developer portal. Yeah. So in developer portal has documentation, probably also blog posts, code samples. I think is important. Maybe community content like frequently asked questions and stuff. So and basically bringing all these things together. I think that's what docs like what Drupal is great at for, and what a developer portal should be like unifying that experience. Because yes, you know, having your docs on GitHub where people can easily interact with them and change them, that's fun, that's great. But I think that in some cases, like, I still think that you should bring it all together. So now, why is Drupal so great for docs? I think simply because of the massive amount of different things that you can do with it. Like, for example, documentation authoring infrastructure. Like, we've done projects where we import data into Drupal. So you have a writer team doing their crazy XML thing with Oxygen or a similar authoring tool, where they're building the documentation in like XML files basically, and then parsing, like generating XHTML through the Data Open Toolkit, which is an open source tool that community has, and then ingesting that into Drupal and then publishing through Drupal. So we've done stuff like that. And you could set that up so that it even happens automatically. I've got a slide about that. And so I think for documentation, probably you should be thinking about how are you going to do your authoring? Are you going to just add it in Drupal, make HTML blobs, like, you know, with the WYSIWYG editor? Are you going to do it in Markdown or restructured text, or any of the other flavors of Markdown-like stuff? Like, and you know, restructured text is more than RST. This is one of the formats that is used for documentation. Like Sphinx, a Python project, uses restructured text. Like also Read the Docs originally started with restructured text, I think, and then they added other formats to it. Or Dita, like, you know, could be any of these. And I think the cool thing is that with a tool like Feeds in Drupal, you can basically configure an import workflow where you can have your authoring team doing their magic however they want to do it. Maybe have a distributed effort where this person is responsible for this part, this person is responsible for that part, and bring it all together and then generate your documentation and then import it into Drupal. You can set that up automatically. You can have a build process that triggers a webhook that just pulls in the content. So you can make this really like full-fledged complex systems that do this, bringing it all together automatically even. And that's kind of really cool, I think. This is a drawing by Botja, my colleague, who explained how you could set up an authoring workflow in Dita. So you start in Oxygen. Oxygen is an XML editor by a couple of really cool guys from Romania. And it's, yeah, like in the Dita world, it's one of the best editors, and it's also more affordable. So they have a code repository. They generate XHTML. You can, with Feeds, you can set up a watched folder so that when something happens in that folder in your file system, Feeds will pull in the content. Then or the writer can click on import, and then the content gets imported into the Drupal site. And you can automate this with deploy hooks. So if you have a Git repository, then you could have like when operation happens, you can have a deploy hook that is triggered as a webhook that just tells Drupal like, hey, it's time to go and update.
Question.
Yeah.
So back on that. So in the first block up there, so is the documentation coming from, say, code that's in Subversion that is then, you know, with PHP doc or something like, or is it that the documentation itself is in Subversion?
This is the documentation itself. This is like hardcore writer teams, right? This is like, so Dita is used mostly in organizations, Dita is a tool that allows you to reduce your translation costs. So you have your translation, you have 20 products, and they all overlap somewhat, right? So you have like one core thing, and then 10 different varieties, and then 10 different flavors on top, and you get this plugged thing, like, and you get 20 or 40 different varieties, and each of them need to be documented in 20 languages. Now, if you do that in a traditional system, you build deliverables for every single thing, and then you translate that deliverable every time again, and it costs an enormous amount of money. So what they do is they translate the topics, so like, and that's the smallest content elements, kind of like a node in Drupal, and then they compile the topics, and that way they don't have to retranslate the deliverables. They're translating something more upstream, and because the way Dita works, it's like you have the topics that get grouped together using a Dita map. It's kind of like a menu structure, you could almost think of it. And the cool thing is that you can reuse the same topic in different of these maps. So it's like, so dogbook and the book module in Drupal, like book module, I don't know if you've used it. Book module is, I don't want to do too much bashing. It's an appropriate tool. We've used it a lot, right? But the biggest drawback for the book module is that you can only put a node in one place. So, like if you have this case where you have like, say for example, you're like in the Dita world, there's this mining company. They built these giant big machines, and every machine is kind of different because they have this component and that component and that component. But then the docs need to be really, really good, because if this machine breaks down, it costs them millions a day, right? So they need to have really, really good documentation so that they can fix it. But all these machines are different. So how do you build documentation for that in a scalable way? And the way they do that is with these components. So you plug this component in, so we're going to plug that component into your docs. And it's this component like compose, like basically composing documentation, which is very, very interesting, I think.
Okay, so if it's using Oxygen, then it's an XML or X16?
Yeah, so Oxygen is an XML editor. So that uses XML. And what you generate there is Dita files, and Dita is a like they have their own DTD, so it enforces a certain XML structure. And then the XHTML you generate using the Dita Open Toolkit, and that's a Java application that runs on the command line, that takes a Dita map, fetches the topics that are in it, and then generates the output that is a combination of it. Okay? So this is a longer one. I think probably this explains that. Dita editor, export Dita maps, compress, upload. Yeah. So this is what we've built for one customer. And then we generated the menu structure and the files, and then we imported the content. They could update it automatically, etc. So, well. Yeah, so another really important aspect, this is more kind of like general stuff you should be thinking about when doing documentation. A really important thing is content architecture. And like a lot of times I'm still figuring this out, but a lot of times I've seen documentation where they start from the product. So they'll start with like the front page of the company's documentation is like, these are all our products. Like, which one are you using? Often customers don't even know, right? So then they have to like, I don't know. So they have to start maybe random clicking or guessing, and then like going into it. So I think probably a better way of doing docs is from a jobs to be done perspective. This is a methodology. It's a little bit like, wait, what is the other one? Personas. Yeah. So there's like this. This is your territory. So there's this discussion going on in the UX world between people that like personas and people that like jobs to be done. Personas are like idealized types of people that have a certain job to be done. Well, that need to do certain things, and it's like it's a way to create empathy, as far as I understand it. Jobs to be done, like I need to be careful. So, and probably my colleague will be listening, so I might get a lynch party at home. Jobs to be done is from is another way of looking at this, where you say, let's forget about these people. Let's just look at what they need to do. And this methodology, there's this apocryphal story about a research group that needed to find out why people were buying milkshakes in the morning. And so there was a McDonald's, and they found out that like lots of people were buying milkshakes in the morning. And that didn't make any sense at all, because there were no kids. And so why were all these people buying milkshakes? What they found out was that a lot of people that had a long commute, they wanted something to just, be busy with while they were driving their car. So the job that had to be done was something food that was comforting, that would take their mind away from, the traffic and whatever. And and that's why adults were buying milkshakes. And then once they figured it out, they figured like, okay, this is a job that we need to do. So we need better products for this job. So maybe we can make like some sort of adult shake or something that adults will like, and that will better fulfill this job. And it's an interesting perspective to look at, both from an architecture for your documentation and also from like what content you should be creating, I think.
But
yeah?
Going on that, so information architecture is one of my things, as well as personas. And there's always the challenge that there's going to be someone coming in and using whatever you built in some way you didn't think of.
Yeah.
So then if you're categorizing things by job to be done, how do they start figuring out where to go, as opposed to
Yeah.
organizing like things with like things?
So I like, probably you still need to organize like things by like things, but I think the key is that you need different types of different types of documentation. So you need a getting started guide, you need a troubleshooting guide, you need these different types of guides, and not just well, here's the manual, and there's no different aspects to it. And I think probably also like thinking about what are the most important things that people need to do might be also a way to look at it. So, but I don't have all the answers. We're still learning about this stuff, and yeah. So, yeah. So one of the key things about developer portals is that you need to remove friction. And what I mean with that is, like, how can you get someone to start using your API like immediately? And one really cool way, if anybody is building APIs, to do that is to do a hackathon. Can people, from the moment they start in your hackathon, can they get started really quickly? Can they get their API keys? Can they get their API keys? Because a lot of organizations have this kind of manual vetting thing where, you need to jump a few hoops before you get an API key. And then maybe you only get your API key after the hackathon is finished, right? So, a really easy way, kind of, basically hackathons are a great UX test for APIs. And that's one thing I learned at, I don't remember which event, but it was kind of like a cool takeaway that I like sharing. So brings us to code sample libraries. So code repositories are landfills for abandoned code. And I know this is like inflammatory and way too harsh. I know that it's not true, but it is still true a little bit at least. if a lot of people, so if you're going to put your code samples in your code repository, you better also have a way to make those findable, like, and not just rely on Google to find your code, your code samples. And I think Drupal can play a really, really nice role in that. We did this thing for iText, which is a PDF library. So they are like they're an open source PDF library. They're AGPL, so they're dual licensed. The cool thing that we did there, so they had this. So the founder, one of the biggest ways that they are growing their business is by answering questions on Stack Overflow. So what happens? Developer has some weird PDF problem, goes to Stack Overflow, asks a question. The founder or developer sees the question, makes a nice little code sample how their PDF library solves that problem, submits an answer, really nice code sample with some blurb of text, and this is how they've grown their business quite a lot. I think this is one of their biggest growth engines, actually. Now, they had this thing where they had to post these code samples also in their site, and they had cache filter set up, which is a syntax highlighting, but it was still a little bit like quite some manual work. So I think the coolest part that we did on this side was that we set up this whole workflow where you could start from a question on Stack Overflow, answer it, make the code sample. Then we had a field, like a GitLab file field, that a GitLab reference field that allowed you to pull a code sample from GitLab, from the code repository, straight into Drupal. Add a little bit of markdown text to explain what you're doing. And then when you save it, you get this result. So it just pulls it from GitLab. As you see, there's actually I can show you. This is their developer portal. I need to click a bit deep because I need to get to one of the examples. Like here, so this is one of these examples. These functions here, or I don't know if they're functions. Like, I'm not a developer, so here I come out of the here I fall through. Probably the classes, yeah. So these classes, when you click them, they go to the reference documentation. This is imported from code using Javadoc that we use to automatically generate the documentation, the reference docs from the documentation in the code, and then import that, and then link this up using the syntax highlighting. So we have both the regular syntax highlighting and the links to the reference docs. So and you get this rich thing that's like connected with lots of different pieces, which I think is really cool. We have a new thing, but I can't show it because it was a prototype for a customer that's not public yet. But like Twilio did this thing where they had code samples like in the middle with a left pane, which was like a story about how to do an implementation. So like how to use our APIs. So for example, we're going to do an example of how to send SMSs with an application. So first you need to do this function, and then they explain. And then when you click on it, it goes to the code where that is done. Then you go to the next step, it scrolls further. So, and it's like connected with each other. Well, I'll just explain it. I won't go too much further. And then in the right pane, we have reference docs. So again, this kind of stuff. So you get these rich experiences where a developer can follow a story, like read a storyline, follow with it through the code, and at the same time learn how all the references, how the API works, which I think is really cool. Now, the best part about this example is that, so you start with the import, do all the stuff. Now, there's also a function in this site that allows the founder to generate books automatically. So he's generating most popular questions on Stack Overflow about his PDF library just with a click of a button. So, and we grab all the markdown, we grab the code samples, pull it all together in one file, and it's the format of LeanPub, which is a publishing service. and it pushes it all into Leanpub, and you get a book. So, which I think is really, really cool.
Is there an API for Stack Overflow to get that information?
We're not using an API for Stack Overflow. There we're just copy pasting.
Okay. Oh, okay.
That's because you anyway you have to like select the code sample that you're using, but that you do like one time. And we're organizing these in book module. There's also the tags. So like the best part of, like I said earlier, that code repositories are like a landfill for code samples. This is how you make them searchable, and you can organize them in categories, and you know, and link them up and make them findable basically. Without something like this, it's kind of hard to find your way through it. Else you just have a long list of code samples, and it doesn't make sense because there's no metadata and it's not interconnected. So I think this is pretty important. I think if you need code samples. So we built we extended the GitLab module with the GitLab field. We haven't done the same for GitHub because this customer didn't require it, but it shouldn't be too hard to do that for GitHub also. API reference doc. So this is the Apigee thing. They have they use Swagger, which is an API description language, and they automatically generate documentation from it. I think. But that's part of their product. So there's also a module on Drupal.org for generating documentation from Swagger. And the cool thing, let me show you. This is a site that we did a while ago. Now they've been further developing it, so it's not all our work. But I think probably here, yeah. These are Swagger docs, if I'm not mistaken. So like where you can do like a call, and I don't know too much about this. This is too much on the coding end of things, but this if you're like developers know this stuff, like they already know Swagger, and there's a module for this kind of things also in Drupal. So I already talked about imports of reference docs using Doxygen or Javadoc. The Geshe filter I already showed you. So yeah, that's like the reference docs piece. Next is the video docs. I think one of the key things there is to consider if you should have private or viral video. And what I mean with that is YouTube is, I think, the second biggest search engine in the world. Like people don't think about it like that, but I don't know if it's the second, but it's one of the largest search engines in the world. A lot of people go to YouTube to find tutorials. So they go there and search there. And so publishing your content on YouTube might be an interesting strategy to make your product findable. Again, the SEO piece that I talked about earlier. Now, some products prefer to have their tutorials private so that their competition can see how they're working. Again, I don't think that's probably the smartest, but you know, sometimes you can't really do it differently. So this is an important thing to think about. There's another thing that we've built. Like if you have documentation, there's tools to let you search inside of documentation, inside of videos. This is a Clarify. So we've built a module for them. We'll hopefully be able to publish it soon. Like we're on hold a bit. But basically what it does is you send a video to them and they get all the text out of it. They can put captions on it, or you can just look for keywords. And then you can basically just search a video like you would search a text document, which I think is really, really cool. Like we built the module that we built, but as I said, we're on hold a bit for publishing it. the module that we built allows you to like if you have your video docs in Brightcove, then it's like integrated. So you just upload your video file, it submits it both to Brightcove and to Clarify. The captions are generated, the captions come back. Brightcove processes the video and like combines the whole in the searchable thing. I think it's super cool.
So if you're searching then for something in the video, you can jump right to that
Yeah.
place in the video where you mentioned.
Currently, it's like separate from the normal search. So like there's a video search and there's a regular search. But when you do the video search, then you get this kind of thing where you can like, well, if you use their player with you know where the keyword has been mentioned, which is super cool.
I see, so it's like success was mentioned.
Yeah.
all the reference on it.
Yeah. And here we come to la pièce de résistance, embedded help. So one of the things, and I also had a discussion about that today, is like, how do you reduce the cognitive load of documentation? What I mean with that is, you know, you're driving and you're looking at your map, like in the old days. That was scary, right? Because you can only do one thing. You can either read your map or you can drive. You can't do both at the same time. And that is because there's too much information in the map. A map is like lots and lots of data. And to be able to use that, you have to like parse it and split out all the pieces. So it would be much better if you could reduce the cognitive load, like reduce the amount of information that you're feeding to people to bare minimum so that they know what to do right at the right time without having to start looking for it. And that's cognitive, that's GPS basically. So this is the principle for this stuff. This is an old GIF, but this is Walkup, like an older version, where basically you have these text bubbles that show you what to do, but while reducing the cognitive load. And so Walkup, as I explained a little bit earlier, is a walk-through service, microservice now written in Go. And it allows you to record walkthroughs, but let me show you how that works. So I'm going to record one. So oh yeah, I didn't click the link. So you can click on any elements that's there, and I'll show you in a moment, like the image, finish and save, and then when you open it and play it, you get a walkthrough, and you can edit it, add a title, a description. And it's basically, the cool thing is that we're recording what you've done. So it's also Selenium test. And then that Selenium test becomes like coupled with your documentation, so that your documentation basically becomes testable and automatically playable. And then you can take screenshots, like you could take a screenshot here with, if there's enough text in here that explains what it is that you're supposed to do. You can basically have a visual tool that automatically regenerates the visuals based on the test. So that's Walkup. So this is the microservice. Like this is the code about how to run it. This is embed code. So if you put that on your site, it will just create the walkthrough.
So storing it on Walkup and using
Yeah.
the UID here to
Yeah.
retrieve yours.
Yeah. So here, let me go back to the presentation. I think.
How do you get back to it?
Sorry?
How do you distribute that once you've recorded one?
So there's different ways. Like I'll show it now. I was going to show it later, but I'll skip it later then. So the way that we're currently thinking about distributing is this widget, is the an embeddable contextual help widget that allows you to pull in different pieces of media, documentation media into your application. And one of the things that's important to know about Walkup is that we learned that like a lot of people came to us because they wanted walkthroughs. Like I was explaining that earlier. Like WalkMe is doing that's a commercial provider. They're doing a really good job promoting it and getting everybody excited about walkthroughs. And then people start looking, like they go to WalkMe, it's super expensive. So they start looking for free or open source alternatives, and they come to us because we've got a blog post about free and open source alternatives to WalkMe. And and then we show them the walkthrough stuff. But then I think a lot of people realize that walkthroughs alone are not enough. Like I think you need a more holistic approach to contextual help to explain people like what we have here with videos, for example. So there's a video in the contextual help. Now this widget can be different on every page, right? And these are walkthroughs that are triggered. Now today there was a very interesting remark, like, can you open these things as a side thing so that there's 2 iframes? And I was like, oh, that's like kind of a good idea. So yeah. But that's for later. I can actually let's see. That's I've shown you this, the in-place editor, the widgets. I think one thing that I can show you still is this. Embed the docs. This is a tool for making these widgets. Right now it's static, so it's like you put some resources in it and then you get this thing, right? But I'll show you how you make one. You can see them here. Like you have a test widget. This is the paragraphs module that we're using. So you can just add a walkthrough. Did we have one here? Yeah, I think this one. Copy that link into the widget. Save. And now we have a walkthrough also. So it's basically a way for building this up. Now, yeah. Now, the thing I'm really excited about is, imagine that you could build these things based on behavior of the user. So like, I was talking about that earlier also, like marketing automation is a big thing right now. And everybody's like, you know, we need to personalize the experience for marketing purposes so that we can target users based on who they are and their behavior and give them the information that they're looking for, or that they're most likely to buy because of. What if you would use that for, what if we would use that power for good, and we actually use it to improve the experience of a user in an application? So like doing tracking of behavior in the application, and then based on that behavior, set up certain trigger moments that trigger certain types of documentation. Maybe this thing starts to blink here, like the little light starts blinking, like, you know, it's the 3rd time that you've gone from this page to that page and back again. Probably you're stuck. And we think we know what you're stuck on. Like maybe it's one of these things. So that's kind of like what I'm thinking about. And to set up sort of a tracking system that you can then embed into your application, into your web application, and then use that data to set up these models to trigger certain documentation in a very friendly, unobtrusive way like we don't want to do the clippy thing. Like no. Yeah, it's kind of like clippy really, but
Just need a paperclip.
yeah, but maybe, yeah. I think it's like Clippy reborn.
Yeah.
Like he has some karma to make up for. But I'm super excited about this because I think that this could be AI for documentation, and like imagine like you don't even have to call support. It's like the application is helping you because it knows what you're trying to do. That's
Microsoft definitely said that about Clippy. I still agree with what you're saying.
yeah. So the thing is that they didn't have. They built it on a bunch of assumptions.
Yeah.
They didn't have data, and I think that with tracking we can have data to base it on, and then when people are annoyed and say like when they click away the thing, then we know that it was not right, and that we shouldn't disturb them. So yeah, I think I think it should be fun. I think I think this is a really big thing. I'm really excited about it. So yes. So that's adding this thing, like adding one of these static things. If you want one of these in your site, just go to embedthedocs.com, create a widget. It's free. You can just plug it into your site. The static ones, like we haven't documented yet how to make it just using your own Drupal 8 site, because we're using a combination of Walkup for the course headers. And notice how I plug some fantastic developer language in there without blinking. So for doing the course headers to be able to embed this stuff into the site. Frequently asked questions. This is probably also a pretty important piece of your documentation. Predictive docs, that's what I just talked about. Community interaction. I think probably important, but what's important here is like, forums. But I get the feeling that just like we are moving away from the open web, that also like Stack Overflow, Quora, there's like a few destinations that have become the default for developer community interaction. So some of those questions probably will not end up on your site. And forums you have to be very careful with, because like there's nothing sadder than a dead forum, like, right? If you have a forum on your product website and there's nothing happening, that's a bad sign.
How Stack Exchange's API?
I don't know how good they are. That's probably like we talked about it earlier actually. But that's a good question. So maybe, but yeah, it's tricky, I think. Depends
It's
also on the product.
Sorry? It's Stack Exchange is a lot more structured than Quora.
Yeah. But I think you might. There's a few other documentation tools or support tools that you could use. Like you could plug a chat into your into one of these widgets. You could have a chat thingy, and then it asks questions and it comes back with likely answers, or it stores those questions and then with the answers or something like that. I'm very ambiguous about forums. I've seen them fail a lot. And so I'm always, whenever people say, "Oh, we want a forum," I'm always like, "Are you really sure? Like, and do you have the community to support this?" And that's pretty much my brain dump about documentation. Is there more? We haven't talked about contextual, like about what's the name? We talked about contextual help. We didn't talk about conditional help. So there's we're doing this piece for one customer now where we have one topic, but depending on certain conditions, it will show more or less text. or different pieces of text. So you have the general outline, but there's pieces of the text that are marked up with a certain tag, so that you can filter them out depending on the audience. So that's something that can be kind of cool. Like right now, that's an HTML tag that we're filtering out, but that's because of that customer, because they have legacy content like that. But I've told the guys that I want that contributed with markup, so that we can do that in a more general way.
So if, for example, you had content modules, or do you guys call them content modules, or do you call them feature modules? You're different.
Well, in our case, it depends on what type of user, what persona is accessing the data. You might want to have someone who is a scientist accessing a certain subset,
Yeah.
versus someone who is an oversight person or someone
Yeah.
who's a user.
So and for that, conditional text can be useful. Yeah. And then you could do that based on the role, or you could do that based on like a little drop-down thingy. I haven't talked about. So we talked about how bad the book module is. Well, as I said, like it's great. It's good enough for a lot of cases, but I've been doing some thinking about like something to replace the book module. I can dig up the UI, like the UX mockups for that. It's like a navigation structure where you can just basically switch contexts. So if a node is in multiple books, you have like a drop down that remembers in what book you were, but you can like click the drop down and see what other books it is, and like basically switch context that way. So that's one other thing that I have about docs, and I think that's pretty much it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? That's like massive brain down.
If somebody says he's not a developer.
Yeah.
Reusability is always a big question for us,
Yeah.
as you know.
Yeah.
So I could always throw out questions that we've covered.
There's the piece about Git. Like, there's one other kind of dream that I have for documentation, which is reusable topics, but in like a GitHub way. So what I mean with that is that, like, imagine that all your topics are in a GitHub repository, and then you, like the thing that I explained with Dita, where you have a Dita map that pulls together different pieces, and then publishes the whole as an output, as a deliverable. But imagine that you could do that with repositories from all over the web. Right? So you could say like, okay, I want head from that topic, from that person's documentation about this module. I want version 2, or like I want this branch from that person's version of that topic. So basically you pull documentation from all over the web, and then mash it all together, push it through a pipeline, and generate a deliverable that's like composed from different like community topics. So basically turning documentation into something that becomes contributable and modular, just like our code. I think that could be super, super, super cool. And I think the UI for it shouldn't be too hard. Like you would need like a tree-like hierarchical thingy where you can like drag a repository that you have access to. You could then also have an edit button that links you back to GitHub, where you do a pull request for a topic. So like there's this whole, wow.
So I don't know how related this question is, but documentation can change over time because there are references or like your regulations that may be related to whatever your documentation is could change over time.
Yeah.
Are there ways that you've seen for versioning or for because say like in our case we look at NIH guidelines say that they come out with a new set of guidelines,
Yeah.
and so would we be able to reference like the older version versus the newer
Yeah.
version, and then also track, when it changed and have that update automatically in our site?
What we've done for that, so we've had this question for data import, and then we just had a category tag, like just a keyword basically, a taxonomy term for version. And then that way we could use a faceted search to narrow down in a certain version. Like say okay, I want only docs from the latest version, or I want all the docs from about this topic. And you could use a faceted search interface for doing that. So we've
you'd
done.
have to copy those documents somewhere.
The cool thing here is that if your documentation is code, if your documentation is managed in a code repository, you can just do your build process again with your new version. This is what we did for them. This is one way. Another option would be to use conditional text. That could be another option where you basically say, well, this bit here is changed from version 2 to version 3, and like here it's also changed a bit, and then you could like have a selector to switch between versions that way. So I think there's those two mechanisms to approach it. Like Confluence it's tricky. Like we had one customer, and their biggest reason to move away from Confluence was this problem. Now I've heard that there's plugins for Confluence that allow you to do versioning, but I don't know how good they are. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I've seen versioning in Confluence.
Yeah.
So I know that, and we must have that plugin enabled to be able to see that. But
Okay, so the expert's not here.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Other questions?
Thank you. This is really cool. Good
Yeah,
talk.
thank
you.
Thank you.
This is such an awesome mic.
Very